our session on classroom management. I have a sign in, if you wouldn't mind, just name, department, and email. We'll send you a brief eval form after the session. And my name's Rusty Carpenter. I think I know most of you or have worked with most of you, so thanks again for being here.
And if I'm not Rusty, I must be Sarah. So good afternoon. I spent the morning in Dean's Council, so that's why I need notes and Rusty doesn't. My wits are still a little disordered from 4 hours sitting in a room meeting and looking at spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. So this will be a nice change.
Mm-hmm. It's a diversion from meetings and spreadsheets. So we're really excited to talk with you about classroom management. We have some strategies, some concepts that we'll talk about, but much of the session will be led by you, discussion-oriented. We want to hear from your ideas, your challenges, stories from the classroom, and we want to kind of bring that out and put it into context.
And Matt's got coffee, so he'll be ready to go.
There you go. Also, and kind of put that into conversation with with some strategies that we have. So we'll start with with just brief introduction. So. Name and department. Paul's with the Null Studio. Media.
Behind the camera.
Yes. So we'll start with you, Matt.
Matt Schumacher. I work in student success, but I teach first year course.
Great.
Chad Foster. I'm with the Department of Safety and Security over in the College of Justice Safety.
Okay. It's Chad.
Eric Miners, and I'm in the Department of Communication in the College of Athletic Arts.
Okay.
Carlos Lewis, economics.
Hi, Sultana, retired faculty member from Special Ed Department, College of Education.
I'm Randall Swain, the Department of Government and Economics.
Timothy Ford, University Office.
Twyla Harris, Curriculum Instruction. Okay, Payco, Chemistry Department.
Welcome.
All right. That gives us an idea of where you're teaching, and so we have a few goals for this afternoon. We'll identify some classroom management challenges. I think if you've taught, regardless of the class, you're familiar with some of the challenges that you've faced in your own classes, and we'll talk about some of those. We can admit, it's a safe space, we can admit that there are often challenges with those. With our teaching environments, and we'll talk a little bit about those.
And we'll also talk to you about some techniques that you can use that are very student-centered and that help you set some expectations going into the class and make it a little easier to set the right tone from the very beginning and help students be comfortable in the classroom and help you be comfortable so that you are beginning the class on the right footing and helping to establish the expectations at the outset.
Mm-hmm. We'll also go into some effective
and ineffective
approaches for classroom management. So we'll kind of look at both sides. We'll talk about why some things work and why other things fail. So we're going to take a pretty honest look at that.
And sometimes you do the best you can, and you've set everything up properly, you think everything's going well, and then something happens and it all goes kablooey, no matter what you've done, and despite your best efforts, and we'll try and help you figure out what to do when that kid's yelling, or they're going at each other, or somebody's yelling at you, and you've got a confrontational situation in your classroom, and you need to figure out how to de-escalate or get out of that situation, or get the class back on track, and we'll give you some options for dealing with those kinds of situations when they happen. Those of you in my home department may have seen that happen during elections, especially some contentious recent ones, and we'll see if we can help you with some of those processes.
Sounds good. All right, so why should we focus on classroom management? We can think about this, or we should think about this for a number of reasons, and we could have titled the session any number of probably more creative, maybe innovative. It is the TLI series title, but we wanted to kind of try to understand the basics of classroom management and to talk through that with you. So we're facing challenges. Sarah mentioned the elections, and we're hearing about maybe mandates from the state. We're talking about higher ed being under fire, and these changes. Those factors can enter the classroom as well. There are a number of factors that faculty have to overcome, to have an effective classroom, to design an effective learning experience for students, and to really be student-centered and be engaged. Some of that means kind of structuring and organizing that classroom learning environment and really preserving that space. Those same students often bring those factors, those outside factors, as well into your classes. So classroom management is challenging. It's often difficult to focus on the individual student as well, individual student needs, and to kind of managing those interactions and ensuring that they're productive and inclusive can be a major challenge. And of course, one disruption can derail an entire hour class. So we'll take a look at some of those challenges as well. So a number of different reasons to focus on classroom management issues.
So we've thought about some of the common issues that we've both faced in our classroom and some of the things that commonly come up that can be very annoying to faculty members, can get you off track or get you a little agitated. One thing that's really important to note is the students take their cues from you. So your demeanor, your level of agitation, your mood affects the students. The leader always affects what goes on in the classroom and what happens to all of the followers. So if you walk into the classroom in a foul mood, your day has already gone pear-shaped. They sense that immediately, and then they start getting agitated. So knowing how you're feeling and being in a good place when you walk into your classroom is very important. But then they can set you off, or they can set each other off by what's happened in their own lives when they walk into the room. But some common things that faculty members complain to me about, both in my life as chair and my life as a dean, when I'm team teaching as a colleague, cell phones. Or the thing where it rings and they answer it right in the middle of your class. Has anyone ever had that happen? I'm seeing nodding, and it seems unspeakably rude, but yes, that's happened. Or they sit in the very front row and they're texting while you're trying to speak, or even while you're trying to talk to them. The sidebars where you've got the two whispering at the back of the room and you're actually at the point thinking you have to separate them or assign seats so that the little gossipers aren't talking to each other. The people who come in late consistently and with a clatter so that they disrupt everyone. And the way to deal with this is usually not to lock the door of your classroom. I've had a few colleagues do that. I have had some techniques that work. I'm not doing it today because I had a little foot surgery a few weeks ago, but normally I wear heels and they could hear me coming into the class, and so I got to the point where I could get them to race into the classroom before I got there because I had a warning system. But if you don't wear heels, that may not work for all of you. Although it works for most people. Your heels make noise, Jim, so you can probably pull that off if you wear the boots. The student who goes off onto the tangent, so you'll be going right along, everybody will be on topic, and then the one bounces to this thing that happened, and then this movie, and then, no, it's based on a true story, I swear it's relevant, Dr. Miners, really it's relevant, and then it goes off and it bounces into the weather, and then something that happened to his cousin, and next thing you know, you were off down a rabbit hole, and you were trying to pull them back. Just general incivility. This is certainly something I heard from a lot of colleagues, especially during the last election, where it starts with the t-shirt or the hat and the slogan that they're on, and you're trying to pull it back into a level of discourse. It's been particularly bad lately because the level of public discourse has been so lacking in civility that the students are taking their cues from it. The students who correspond with you in an overly familiar way. Sometimes it's more or less harmless where they just address you as hey, dude, hey you, and that's bad enough. Sometimes it's, hey, Rusty. Sometimes it gets more familiar yet. I do know of colleagues who are very clear about how they want to be addressed and who actually won't respond to correspondence unless they're addressed appropriately, or who will bounce it back. And so there's some ways you can set expectations there. Then there's what they show up in, which can be highly distracting both to you or other people, depending on how much is uncovered in the classroom, or just how they seem to have rolled out of bed and shown up in your class, and you're wondering how they made those particular choices. And all of these things are things that can be highly distracting to both you and the other students. So we've got to figure out how to set some expectations at the outset and how to deal with these. What are some other things you may have encountered? That was the list Rusty and I came up with over the weekend, just thinking right off the tops of our heads. Yeah.
Just students that come in totally exhausted, they didn't sleep the night before, and literally cannot keep their eyes open. And I find that to be very distracting.
And sometimes it's the night shift, and sometimes it's the entertainment night shift that
Exactly.
they've done.
Exactly.
I think not only that we are seeing it in our classrooms, but the outside public is also noticing it and is talking about it. This Monday, past Monday, and at Kentucky Tonight, which Renee Shaw does on KET, it was, the whole session was devoted on education, and they talked about the applicants, who they are seeing, and they talked and how they are presenting themselves in the interview. I don't know how many of you saw that program. It was very embarrassing for me to see that as a teacher educator. So public is talking what they are demonstrating now in terms of their behaviors during interviews and on their applications.
So much informality in the classroom then translates to the interview in the workplace. Absolutely.
More wearing like earbuds, and I have to always remind them to pull it out, and they sometimes try to leave one in, and
Yeah.
You may not be interesting enough. I want to keep my options open. Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is distracting, but students that just show up with nothing, and they just sit there with no book, nothing at all, paper, pencil. That's more of a pet peeve, maybe, but still, it really frustrates me.
There's nothing of value I'm going to need to take down here.
Very
Yeah, the message it's conveying to you. Or I can just memorize it all. Anything else?
This looks like a pretty. This is
Kind of comprehensive.
we expanded the list a bit, but Chad, I think you bring up an interesting point here. Students show up with nothing. What does it suggest? And professors,
Nothing's gonna happen here.
professors are people too. We have feelings, and it's sometimes it's difficult to overlook. Either the nonverbal or lack of interaction, or when that right earbud is still in, even though that right ear is not facing in your general direction. What does it suggest? And then how do we take that? How do we work with it? How do we interpret it? And I think we've all probably faced those challenges, right? That maybe that gesture that was this gesture means the student doesn't think that it impacts or doesn't see how it impacts, but learning is impacted. The way you deliver content is impacted.
When you get an email or a telephone call, I will not be in class today. Are we doing anything important that I should know?
Right. Or did you just drone on like you always do?
when the line's not being prepared, then too, sometimes if they have to bring in something, and they'll just kind of run out of class, go print something off, and then it causes a kind of commotion to go get what they need, and before you could.
Yeah.
I would say, sometimes I would be happy if I could get students to go off on a tangent as long as they're speaking. Or sometimes
Right.
I can't get them to interact at all. And that, I struggle with that sometimes.
The question and then the silence that seems endless.
Right.
Yeah, normally this happens in the last 5 minutes in the class, so some students will try to put things in the backpack and ready to move.
Yeah.
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 I guess if they have food, I mean, sometimes it depends on what they have.
Mhm.
Very loud opening of
Bag.
things and crunching.
Mhm. That's actually a great point. I had a group there, and they were wonderfully engaged students, but I noticed that they had chocolate milk, like not like some big jug. That's a new one.
And nobody else would say chocolate milk.
That's a new one. So I couldn't.
Well, especially in a jug with recording.
I didn't see the jug come in, but
the water.
there it
but
was.
chocolate milk.
Actually, I couldn't help it. I mean, as long as it's chocolate milk.
Did you have some?
I did not try the chocolate milk, but
They ought to at
it's-
least offer you whatever they're having.
they should. I think they
How
usually
many
would.
out of the jug were they?
Are you
It,
sure it was chocolate milk?
During flu season,
about the time I noticed is when they decided to put the chocolate milk away. Although I will say, and I think it's okay to admit, that because it was so unexpected and it was not actually disruptive, it was just unusual, I was more amused than anything else. So I did address the chocolate milk and I had a few questions, but I think it's one of those situations that could have been annoying, but it actually, I think that that moment might have brought the group a little bit closer together. But, yeah, I think their intent was to pass around the chocolate milk. So, yeah, so that was a new one.
I was on
Anything
French
else?
fries one time.
French fries.
Oh, that is highly distracting. That makes me hungry.
Okay.
Yeah, if the professor's stomach is growling, that's never good.
Mm-hmm. So here's our list. We've developed it a bit more. We could probably keep going and adding to that list, but at least we made it to the chocolate milk incident of 2017. So there we go.
All right.
Watch for the chocolate milk.
So, some of how you can deal with this is by setting the expectations, because they don't necessarily know academic etiquette or how to behave in a professional environment. And one thing you want to communicate to them is that the classroom is a professional environment, and so they're supposed to be treating it like a job, which hopefully they will someday have, if they don't already, or like an environment where there's a certain amount of formality expected of them, not stilted, unpleasant formality, but some degree of professionalism and decorum. And you set those expectations when you go in on the first day. And so the syllabus is, of course, the governing document or the class constitution, or the set of rules that you establish in the initial meeting of the class, if it's an in-person class, or on your Blackboard site, depending on how you're conducting this particular class. And so that's the place where you can articulate all of your expectations. So if you don't want them playing with their cell phone, you can tell them that on the syllabus, your cell phone is to be turned off and kept in your bag during the class. And this is my expectation. If there's an emergency, here's how I want you to handle it. And that's perfectly appropriate to put in your syllabus. I expect you not to come to class in your pajamas. So it's okay to tell them you're not supposed to have a hat on in your class. And you can't say you're not supposed to have a MAGA hat in your class. You can't tell them, specific political parameters, but you can certainly address their attire and tell them that you expect it to be appropriate and define what appropriate is. You can tell them how they are to address you. And in fact, they usually appreciate it, because sometimes they put hey, because they don't know if they're supposed to call you Randall or call you Dr. Swain or call you Professor Swain. And so they don't know exactly what to do, and they often appreciate having all of these parameters defined very clearly for them. So the syllabus is the place where you can lay out these things. And if there's something that really drives you crazy, like you don't mind if they have a Cliff Bar in class, but you don't want them to bring the fried chicken, say, I know sometimes you have to eat during class, but please keep it to things that are not overly smelly. Kind of like on an airplane, there are certain things you don't want smelling up the plane for the next 7 hours. You can define that in your classroom too. and then set the expectations for what you want them to do. So the syllabus is your critical place where you can define all of this, and you can use that on the first day too. And so talk about the first day for us, Rusty.
The first day. Yeah, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
have a question, like, and the example you gave, one of them about wearing hats. Have you had experience when they say, this is my freedom of expression?
Well, their freedom of expression, it can take certain forms. So if it's their freedom of religious expression, then absolutely that's something I would honor. If it's just, I like wearing a hat, I can set that parameter. And so then if they come back to me with that, I would say, all right, come to see me after class, let's have a conversation about that. And then I find out what they mean by their freedom of expression. If they just like to wear a hat, and I don't want hats in my class, that's not negotiable. If it's something that's more profound, that is part of their membership in a protected class, then I'm going to honor it. And so I would have that conversation with them privately, because one thing I always want to do is avoid having that conversation in public and avoid embarrassing them or putting them in a situation where they feel they have to confront me in order to save face or in order to protect themselves. So I want them to be comfortable in having the conversation and not put them in a situation where they'd be humiliated, but I'm going to hold my ground, again, unless it's membership in a protected class and unless it's something that I actually have an obligation to honor. And I can say no tank tops and no short shorts, but I also have to make sure I establish the same parameters for men, women, whatever the gender identity, because I'm not going to discriminate on that basis too. So if I say no tank tops, I mean it for everybody.
So thinking about that first day of class, Tim did a great workshop during Deep Week last week, and we had a chance to talk about the syllabus as this. A lot of times we think about it as this legally binding document in some ways, but it's an outline. It sets the tone for the semester. A lot of what Sarah had mentioned. It also is the first day of class. It's also often when students are seeing for the syllabus for the first time, although I always like to provide access to that in advance, noting that it could be adjusted before we all see each other in person the first time. But during the first day, I'm usually pretty honest, and although I am proud of the way that I engage students and students engage with one another in class, and it is not a lecture-focused class, and I'm thinking specifically about my first year writing classes where this year, so this fall, my students were pretty upfront about my role as their first ever college professor. No pressure. But it was the truth. They were a group of high school students, and this was their first experience on a college campus in a college-level course with specific expectations about writing and revision and writing about writing and things that they may or may not have been excited about. But based on what I know from the field, there are certain ways to deliver that content. And we don't have a lot of research to suggest that Scantron exams and lecture promote deep learning among students. And I really want them to be able to transfer this content, and they need to be able to transfer this content into every other scenario, whether it's academic or professional or social. They need to be able to transfer that content. So it is very active, but that introduces other challenges, right? It's not a top-down learning environment, but a lot of the structure it comes into play when the students are doing either group work or peer review work. But I'm upfront about that at the very beginning of class, and I do set the expectations out there and invite input from the students. I invite questions. We save time for questions, and most of the time, students are on board. They can see the value of that kind of structure in this class. Every once in a while, though, you get an interesting question. I kind of embrace that, even though it puts you on the spot. It's one of those. It's one of those moments. It becomes a classroom management challenge. But as long as the question is appropriately framed, related to the subject or to the syllabus. Those are really good learning opportunities for all students in the class. And it also allows me to see some potential, areas where we might be challenged as a group as well. But the first day is really when we set the tone. We set the tone. There are expectations for writing, there are expectations for revisions, and there are certain expectations for how we interact and support each other in this class. Anything outside of that becomes, anything outside of that can move us in directions that are less productive. Tim?
In terms of tone, from a master teacher perspective, what are the tones that you think promote master teacher type qualities?
That's a great question. I always focus on we. And my students from the very beginning know that I'm in this with them. And they know, based on the way that I've set up the syllabus, that first day of class, they know that we are going to learn together. Every group of students is different. Every group of students is different. Out of a given class, maybe half of the students are really passionate about honing writing skills or developing writing skills. But that's on me, and that's why I think the kind of a we philosophy from the syllabus to setting up that time. But in order to get there, they have to be engaged and on board. They have to be engaged and on board. And if they miss a class, they miss a lot of content because it's not in slides. It's not in slides. The learning experience is not there. So the professional expectations are set from the very beginning, and we talk about why that's important. And we hold each other to that standard. If they're let down by a class that I, because of, the way I structured it or, it was off or whatever, they know that they can be, honest with me. But just like Sarah mentioned, we take that sidebar. It's not in that classroom setting unless it's, it's relevant for all students. I usually have a line of students waiting after class to talk about something. And it's usually really good, and really good questions. But that's my approach, and I set that standard from the very beginning in that first day of class. It's apparent based on my body language, the amount of energy that I bring to every class, and those expectations, and in my experience in holding myself accountable for active learning and all of these things that that we learn about just from studying pedagogy. It's difficult to kind of maintain that level of energy, but I expect that to be reciprocated.
So in terms of your expectations for your student, I'm assuming they're explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Or your expectation or the expectations they can have that they can put on you, are those explicit as well? In other words, this is what you can expect from me as your teacher.
Yeah, and sometimes that comes through on the syllabus, but also how the assignments relate back to the syllabus. So I want students to be able to anticipate assignments, and I don't like surprises, especially in the classroom. And I would expect the assignments to directly reflect what they expected on the syllabus, unless there are those productive opportunities to look at a different form of writing, or we had some citation questions come up this semester, and we were able to work through those in class. So those connections and the standard that you set the first day on the syllabus, those also carry through in the assignments, and usually, Tim, that's where that's where the expectations come through for either the specific lessons or the classes. Or those, how the classes are structured with the assignments.
And I think Tim's point about also articulating the expectations for yourself and making it very clear to the students that they can expect professionalism from you, and it kind of segues into what I was going to talk about is important. So when you email me, you can expect a response within 48 hours. when I'm grading you, here is my rubric, if you're using a rubric, or here are the standards I'm going to be using in evaluating your work, and you can expect me to stick to those standards. If you have a problem with the way I've evaluated your assignment, I want you to come and talk to me, and this is the kind of conversation we're going to have, so that you are making it very clear and transparent how you're going to be interacting with them as a professional, so that there's mutuality there, and they're very comfortable and safe in knowing what you're going to be doing with them as an instructor. And so that kind of mutuality also makes them comfortable, so that they don't feel like they're going to be blindsided by anything. Is that kind of what you were going for, Matt?
And one of the things actually I did this past fall for the first time, setting these kind of ground rules or expectations, is more for like discussion and how we treat each other in class.
Yeah.
I actually did it as the class, and we created it together. And I kind of posed a question: where have you seen a good classroom environment? What experiences you had that that worked really well? And then that way, then they are held more accountable, and then they held each other more accountable as far as when this happens. And then I type it up, record it when they're going over these things, we review it, and I post it on Blackboard. But then if I ever, students are coming out of line, they'll kind of either police themselves, or I can always go back and say, these were the expectations we set. But then they're just more actively engaged in that, and I saw a much better classroom performance.
And they take responsibility for it, and then when they're acting out, it's not just Matt says,
Exactly.
I told you not to do this, but remember we agreed.
Right, and I just brought some of the stuff that everyone participates, respect one another, critique ideas, not people, be prepared, put down. I mean, they created that themselves. So
That's awesome.
it was really neat.
There's probably some buy-in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I'm not
Buy-in there.
setting that. We do it as a group, and it just came about that way. And in the first year courses as well, I think pretty sure one of the chapters talks about classroom expectations from the instructor as well as the student too. So they're getting some of that in their first year course as well.
And then ideally you're modeling the behaviors that you want them to engage in as you're conducting the class and as you're interacting with them. And so some of it is you show up on time, and you're always there when you should be, and maybe you're not prepared 100% of the time, because we're all human and we all have those days when we run out of gas, or the tire is flat, or the cat throws up something right as you're walking out the door and you feel compelled to clean it up, or maybe that's just my experience, but or something goes wrong in your day and you do get rushed. But by and large, you're there early, you're prepared, you have your act together when you walk in the door, your full attention is on them, you're calm, you are engaged with them, you're paying attention, and you are there for them in their classroom or on the Blackboard site when you're supposed to be, and you're responding to them and you're keeping your word in terms of all the expectations that you outlined on your syllabus, so that you're consistent and reliable for them. And so part of it is your own professionalism and modeling every behavior that you want them to engage in. Part of it's your body language and your attire and your own tone, and remaining calm in all circumstances no matter what they're doing, and staying in that professional space. A lot of times, as both a chair and a dean, many of the problems that have come back to me and landed in my office are not so much because of the student's behavior, which was clearly inappropriate, but they come to my office because of the faculty member's behavior. And so the student has done something which is a problem, but a problem that would easily be handled at a much lower level, except for what the faculty member then did. So the student has missed class because of this child care problem or that child care problem, and the faculty member said, well, I have 3 kids and I managed to get to work on time. And that's either in the email that gets forwarded to the president, or it's said in class in front of everybody else, and the student's humiliated, and then it lands in my office. Or the faculty member says in the hallway with the other students there, when the students complain about the grade, well, that's the worst assignment I've ever read. I can't believe you didn't do better than that. And then it's in my office. Yeah, these are actual things that happen. And so maintaining your own level of professionalism and modeling that behavior is one thing that's really critical to maintaining that level of calm in the classroom and keeping everything manageable. Yes, sir?
So do you think that it's possible that the tone of the syllabus on the first day can alienate some students?
Absolutely. And it's often helpful to have someone else read your syllabus and make sure that that tone read by a neutral third party is what you want it to be. Because sometimes you read what you think it should be there, and you don't see how you sound to other people.
So when I was reading about scripture and it talked about learners centered, that's my thing. So the rest of you've already done it because you're creating a syllabus where you're sharing the power. You also do the same thing there. But it's interesting to me because some students, if they look at the syllabus, that it's very professorial or contractual,
Yeah.
and this is the first time doing it, and you have lawyers in there that may or may not understand. They don't see any of you in the syllabus. All
Yeah.
they see is that can alienate them.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do in the first day of class and they've seen the syllabus online? They go to the back of the class. They're already setting themselves up. You know what? I'm not going to be engaged in this class for whatever reason. And we think it's on them. It may not be on them. They may be reacting to our syllabus.
Yeah.
I have 2 syllabus and one syllabi, and I plan on sharing it at the conference at the end. Isn't that?
Okay, yes,
Pedagogical.
pedagogical.
Thank you.
Yes.
But I have the professional one with all of the standards and everything else, and then I have a student-friendly version that I pick out pieces and I speak in modern tones and make it more interactive. Yeah. So that's something that yeah, you'll come. So
There's also something to be said about the level of engagement and interaction that an instructor has with this, with the class throughout the semester, so that when you do encounter those type of issues, now, I think it's easier to navigate the question that you had in a traditional classroom setting. So, for example, when I walk into the classroom after the second day and I begin to see students navigating towards the back, I'm already walking around saying, I'd like for you to consider, moving forward. And I kind of explain, why it's important, how studies talk about the correlation between sitting up front in the class and class performance. And so as you continue to do that, and I'm talking about in my one-on-one classes where that's just the, students who were in high school last year, that's their inclination. So you begin to have those conversations about your engagement in the process and what you bring to it, how that can have a long-term effect. And as you keep pounding those lessons to it, it comes across. And see, for me, that's a big thing. I tell students, if you sit in the back, you're communicating something to me that, but I want to engage you, so come, move forward. And I wait for them to move forward. You see, I wait for them. So my teaching style is if I ask a question, I will wait for an answer. Right? I take water and I drink water and I say, I'll wait for you. And I tell them, sometimes we can get out of here early, or we can get out of here on the dot. It depends on how fast you give me the information. So about the 4th week, you kind of establish a rapport with the classroom. But the challenge is how do you do it in an online setting? Those are the type of, because it's difficult to remove some of those contextual hurdles in a setting where you never actually visibly seen and you can interact with students. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's if we're thinking about I was immediately thinking about how I set the tone for groups. That the interactive and the way that I try to structure interaction is often my strategy for managing from afar how students are working with each other. And so we rarely get comfortable in that. We're working with different students with different perspectives, and I think it keeps the class exciting. And so some of that strategy might translate into, say, interactive areas on either discussion board or chat. What are they? How are you structuring groups or the class around those interactive opportunities? And it provides students with an opportunity to work with students that maybe that wasn't the same group as last week. And we set goals and we set parameters. So you might not have 2 days to work on an assignment or 2 days, to submit this, but you have that, that you have that predefined goal, and if it's a group assignment, sometimes students kind of bond over that, over that challenge. I mean, that's immediately where I went, with it, is that interactive, and sometimes creating that social space is one way that I try to manage classes, productively,
Okay.
and not so much rigidly, because learning doesn't always happen here, but I think it can happen here, but it's more difficult to do.
Right. Well,
I think some of the same techniques, though, watching who's participating and reaching out,
Right.
still works in an online environment.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about the challenge where someone could potentially co-opt the class if you're not careful. And that, the one area where I actually had to go to my chair and get help, we eventually had to. She said it was okay for me to exclude this person from a discussion because he was that caustic and corrosive, and that's for me that's the biggest challenge. And I'm even reticent, hesitant to teach certain content in an online setting, like issues that deal with race and things like that, because it's kind of difficult to navigate some of those contextual hurdles.
And the anonymity makes it easier. Tim?
Yeah, just want to add to that. I have a friend who teaches online, African American woman. She said oftentimes her students will look for her picture, and she did a thing where she wouldn't put a picture of herself, and they would actually email her and ask her the background. So I can identify with what you're saying, because for some of us to talk about certain things on it is crazy. So one of the things I do in my online class, I put my picture, of course, but then I ask each online member to share a little bit about themselves. So we're creating an informal social group where everyone's sharing about themselves. And when I respond, I try to respond and try to bring in some of the things they share about themselves to amplify examples. So there are certain techniques you can do, but there are also some big issues when you're teaching online, especially when, depending on who you are and the content you're trying to cover.
For me, the most difficult situation that I can recall to have, evening classes and graduate students, and you have somebody coming to class with a newborn, sitting in the class nursing. What do you do? How professional can you be? What do you call a professional environment? You can't we do have rooms where they can go,
Yes.
but if they go, then they're missing that much content that is covered. And if they come back, when they come back, there's distraction in the classroom. Everybody's attention is now, and then suddenly you see the baby cooing or doing something. What do? You can't ask the person, well, make some arrangement because that costs. So how would you deal with those situations?
There are a couple of ways you can handle it and talk to the student about what is best for her situation. I mean, nursing, usually you try to make arrangements so that the student can nurse or pump outside of the class, because you don't have to allow children in class because there are certain liability issues. And having the child in the classroom can be a distraction. Usually it doesn't bother me to have people nurse in front of me. That's not a problem, and we do have nursing spaces and pumping spaces on campus. And so I'd have a conversation with the student. It's a problem to have the child in class. We can arrange nursing or pumping areas outside of class. What is the best thing for you? And I'd also probably work with the Title IX office on exactly how to navigate that conversation in the most sensitive way possible, just to cover myself carefully on that. But she certainly does have a right to have a place to do the nursing.
And then if I make arrangement, well, this is the arrangement you will make, somebody still has to be there with the newborn to take care,
Right,
and that means
right,
money for the student. And they say, I'm only a teacher, I don't have that kind of money.
Right, and then I would get help from the Title IX office on working out exactly how those accommodations ought to be arranged so that you have the cover you need in terms of making sure that you're complying with all the regulations on that, because they get increasingly complicated. But yeah, a 3-hour class is hard, especially when the baby's very young.
Is there a definitive university policy on children in the classroom?
There isn't a definitive university policy. We're pretty flexible on that because we have so many parenting students, and sometimes they have childcare issues, and professors have a variety of different policies. So there's nothing hard and fast at the university level, and that's why I would advise, if you've got a nursing student in particular, to work with OEI on it. But then when you're dealing with older children, it's often up to the faculty member to decide if you want to let the kids in class. Sometimes they're disruptive, sometimes they aren't. And in my classes, it was always like I was covering something like rape law, and they would bring the children who were just old enough to get it. And I was talking in code the whole class or something, trying to figure out how I cover this material with the kids in the classroom. And that was always challenging. But I usually didn't want to send the student home, and I don't have any other options. So we're always trying to figure out how to help our students who have so many obligations.
So when you say it's a liability issue, you mean from the instructor's perspective?
And from the university's perspective, especially if you have very small children who could get hurt, our facilities are not necessarily made for small children to be around, just like if you bring animals into our classrooms. And so those are things to be cautious about. The problem is often the students will roll in with their children, and you don't have a lot of time to think it through. And so in retrospect, I might have said, we really can't do this. But it would often be those kinds of situations where you don't quite know that the students are coming in with their children.
We do have other options too, such as now that we've got Collaborate online, you can actually, I set up, like I said, flu season. I set up that we should have, if you've got the flu and you still want to attend class, by all means go ahead. Just do it from home and have a classmate bring in a laptop or something like that. And we have these little heads going around, and that way, if you have a child, you can stay home, but you need to participate too.
Yeah,
and you just always move that microphone when it gets a little bit too loud in the background.
Those are some good options.
With the last point, thinking about rules and boundaries, I make sure that students have every opportunity to ask questions. And my goal is if we do have it as a rule, and there is any level of formality in that there is some buy-in with the rules, and we have some clarity, and students have in class and outside of class opportunities to question those. They know that they're productive occasions to push against boundaries that may or may not see productive, and so I make sure that we have clarity there, and you can kind of gauge the group to make sure that those that are put in place are productive. There's a bit of research, and I'd be happy to send you links in an article. So a lot of these challenges they kind of track into these different areas. But these hot moments, these moments of tension in the classroom, can be those times where it's really tempting to respond and to react. And I guard against that. I don't react. It's not impulsive, but there are certain things that you handle outside of the classroom, certain questions that need to be asked outside of the classroom, and that gives both sides the opportunity to think a little bit more. These are some of the hot moments in the classroom. It's moments of tension. We've covered some of those. Politics, respect in the classroom, the students' willingness to participate in class and in-class assignments or interaction. But also, there are certain moments that you can't avoid, and there are certain behaviors that have to be addressed productively, respectfully in the classroom, and understanding when those, if a group of students is being disruptive at that point, think about the other 20 students who are in that classroom and trying to learn. And so I might go over and I might talk to that trio individually, but I won't. I don't want it to escalate beyond what it is, and so identify the issue, the challenge, and try to move the group forward. I'm always looking for ways to manage those, manage myself in the classroom, and so I don't let I don't let these moments get too heated or beyond the point that you can pull it back in and be productive. So I've learned, over the years, learned a lot about myself and how I react in those moments, and to make sure that I understand that moment when it's kind of derailing. Don't let it get to that moment. Same for students.
Sometimes things will get out of hand in your classroom, especially if you lead a discussion sort of class and in the online environment as well, and especially if you deal with highly sensitive issues. I taught a lot in gender politics. Randall teaches a lot about race. These are sensitive issues and people feel strongly about them. People get very emotional, teaching about elections lately. And the environment is such where, again, the public discourse is highly contentious right now. Emotions are high. Even in our own environment on campus right now, I've been to a lot of meetings where people are tense. They talk about budgets, and people get very emotional and defensive, and you start feeling the emotions ratcheting up and the environment changing. And so this will happen in your classroom too, and there are times when you have to figure out ways to calm the environment, to de-escalate the situation, and to sometimes get yourself out of a conflict that happens in your classroom, or get the students out of a conflict that happens in your classroom. Sometimes it's getting it back on track, sometimes it's just stopping it so that everyone can move on and get to a more productive place, or at least calm down in a situation. Has anyone ever had a class just sort of go off the rails like that? No? Oh, that's fantastic. It'll happen someday. And sometimes it happens online, and then you can do what Randall did and just shut the person off or take them out of the discussion or disable their account, and that's kind of nice when you have that option. Unfortunately, there's not a mute button in your actual class. I've tried. It doesn't work on an actual live student, unfortunately.
What about actually cutting campus police? Is there
Yes, you can do that. I mean, if there's ever a situation where somebody is screaming or being threatening or threatening to physically harm someone, that's absolutely the first thing you should do. Don't go get your dean when somebody's threatening to harm somebody. Go call 911. They have guns, I don't. Or I'm not supposed to on campus, okay? But if there's something threatening going on where you ever feel that there's physical danger or imminent danger in your classroom, you should absolutely call 911. If you call 911 from your cell phone on campus, it will summon our EKU police. It won't summon Richmond police. Or if there's a landline by some mysterious chance in your classroom, that will also summon EKU police, and they'll get there quite quickly. So that's your course of action. But if it's a lower level kind of agitation, again, the first thing, as Rusty said, is to manage yourself. If you get agitated, they're going to get agitated. They're taking all their cues from you. And so staying calm, breathing, a little bit of silence never hurts. Sometimes if you just stay quiet, they will suddenly be quiet. Sometimes I've just walked in at the front of the room. If I'm quiet, they're yammering, and then they'll stop talking. And so your silence can signal things to them. Or if they're yelling at each other and you just wait, sometimes they'll be quiet. You don't want to try to shout over them. And so the louder they get, the more agitated they get, the calmer, the quieter your voice gets. You can find this happens one-on-one too. If somebody starts yelling at you, if you get softer and softer, that will usually bring the other person down. If somebody is waving their arms at you, if your body language gets quieter, they will usually start to come down with you. And so very common conflict de-escalation techniques. So your voice and your body language can help the students calm down. They will imitate you. You'll be the dominant person in the room, and they'll do as you do. The other thing you want to do in such a situation is avoid any kind of public confrontation. So even if you've got some highly agitated students that you want to calm down, you can say, I want to have this discussion with you after class if they're arguing with you on a point. So let's hold that for now, get back on this other topic, and we'll talk about that later. And that way you're trying to move that conversation that's highly agitating to another context, get it out of your classroom so that you don't continue to agitate the whole group, and have it privately when you can talk to the student and say, hey, why were you trying to ramp up that other person, or try and figure out what's going on with that student in a context where you're not having to do it publicly. And part of the reason you're trying to avoid the public confrontation is you don't want that student to continue to question your authority and undermine your authority in front of all the other students, because you do want to maintain that authority without bullying or putting the student in a situation where they have to keep confronting you. So you never want to humiliate a student in front of the class, but you do want to maintain that level of authority. And again, remaining calm and moving any confrontation to another time when everyone is calmer, and to a private space, not necessarily alone with someone who's screaming at you. You don't want to be in that situation. But moving that more sensitive discussion about the grade or whatever is upsetting the student to another context is what you want to try to accomplish. And then you're always trying to encourage the students to maintain the standards of civility. So if the tone gets out of hand, say, hey, let's rephrase that and talk about that in a more civil way. Or, that's not really the tone I want to have for this conversation, so could you rephrase that? Or perhaps you could ask it in this way. And getting the students to understand how you want the same question to be asked, or how you want to talk about this highly sensitive issue. Again, modeling the behavior you want them to have. And sometimes if it's really just awful and you know that it's not going to be productive, you can end the class. It's okay if things, if you're getting to where you're having racist or misogynist comments that you just won't tolerate, you can say to the class, this conversation has reached a level of incivility that I'm not willing to tolerate. So we're going to stop now, and we're going to come back, and we're going to start this conversation in a very different way. I will send you my expectations. For now, we're going to stop. I'll see you next time. And just go. And then you've been very clear that if they're going to behave this way, we're not going to have class. You're not going to tolerate it. You have standards. You're going to stick by your standards, but you're not angry. You're not confrontational. You're not descending to their level. It's just, this is unacceptable. We're stopping. We're going. And then you get out of there before things escalate further. But the main thing is you set the tone, you stay calm. If it's not going to be productive and you can't go on, you get them all out of there, and then you regroup and start over. Yeah.
In one experience, you could take me back, I guess almost 18 years ago when I first started teaching. This guy, I was teaching in New York, and I was teaching technology courses, and he would see why we had to learn this piece of technology. So in class, in front of everybody, so I don't see why we have to learn this technology, and he wouldn't let it go. So I stopped the class, and I'm reflecting on you brought it back, and I said, let me speak to you outside for a minute. So I just paused the class and I took him outside. And I just shared with him, said, look, as a department, we decided to teach this technology piece in this course. If you have problems with it, you can go talk to the chair, but while you're in this class, you need to be respectful. And he was respectful. He came back in, and I didn't have any more problems with him. But it's like, so for me, if it's a big issue, I take it outside right away. These are your options. You can leave, you can go talk to about it, but you can't do that right here, right now.
And that's an option too. Or say, let's talk about it after class.
Yeah.
And I want to hear what you have to say, and we're going to have the conversation. I respect it, but not right this second.
Yeah, so your point is well taken. You can't engage a student on their level. You cannot do that. Nothing good comes out of that.
No.
Nothing good.
It sounds like you're methodical in your approach.
Yeah.
It's different than...
And you're not saying the student's point is unworthy or invalid or any of that.
Looking back of dismissing the class from the psychologist's point of view, you are then, not you per se,
Right.
I am then reinforcing a negative behavior.
Possibly.
Yeah, because this is what these students wanted. Get out of this class and have a nice evening in a bar. and my evening classes.
It's a last resort.
Yeah.
If things are completely out of control and you can't get them back. But there are times when you've reached that stage and you're not going to get them back on track, and rather than lingering and allowing them to continue in that vein and allowing your own authority to be undermined, sometimes it's your best available option.
If an instructor dismisses a class and then asks to speak to this offending student, that student, I want you to stay behind if wants to have a nice evening. I think that actually enhances the instructor's authority in front of the class, because then that establishes an expectation that, number one, you will be willing to address a student individually, of course, and I think that would probably prevent it from happening in the future.
Yeah,
I think that's the only thing to do, actually, if it comes to that level.
And that's a way you can do it. You say, this is not productive, we're not going to go on you, I want you to stay. Now make sure it's not like some highly violent, big, agitated student at that point where you're going to be at risk. I mean, you use your judgment.
I think the timing of this couldn't have been even just better. I just saw that there's a House bill being considered. I just saw it today.
The concealed carry.
Yes.
Jeez.
So I think it's a very pertinent topic. It can come at a better time. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Yeah, and anytime you feel threatened, trust your gut. Trust your gut.
I had a volatile student that kept it under control in the classroom, and then followed me to my office, and got madder and madder and madder, to the point that I could feel myself getting angry. And I'm like, okay, we got to stop here. We have to take this somewhere else. And I went to the office to have my department head be the mediator between the two of us. He just happened not to be there available at the time, so there was another meeting that came in, and they had police officers there. And there was a threat done to me, and my children happened to be on campus at the time too.
Oh my
As
goodness.
students, not little kids coming in, but he threatened the whole family because he knew us.
Wow.
And we had to be escorted the rest of the semester. This was during the Virginia Tech time.
Frightening.
So we didn't know if he was going to be a copycat or not. And then it got to be a discussion in our classroom. What do you do if he comes back? And we had a plan if something were to happen. Because they
That
knew
could be
he was
frightening.
after me. So, anyway, it can be scary, very scary.
Yeah. So that's a nice segue into challenging students, and I'm also watching
We
the
are almost
time.
out of time because I have a candidate in like 20 minutes.
Okay. So, challenging students. We know that the majority of our students are when we usually have wonderful experiences, but we do have challenging students here. Problematic behavior. Sometimes the environment can be challenging, or participation. There are also some opportunities. I mean, certainly learning students' names and some of those strategies and inviting feedback and encouraging that can be kind of avenues to engage students productively, even when those challenging moments or students arise.
And that's just all about establishing the relationships with students and letting them know that you care about them and want to be engaged with them. If you never learn their names, that suggests you don't care.
We've discussed the technology question a little bit, and certainly technology can be distracting. I don't put rigid parameters on technology, but the understanding, the rule, is that if you're using technology in the classroom, it's a productive use. And here are the productive uses of technology, and students will use their phones, even while we're talking, they'll use their phones to look up information or go and access a set of Google Slides. And we establish a level of trust and respect in that way as well.
I'd never survive Dean's Council.
So we have a few classroom management cases. Some of these might look familiar, but I think for us, since we're a bit over here,
Why don't we provide them with the
we
slides?
can provide
and
you
these are
with the
things
slides.
you
Yeah.
can ponder, use.
And if you want to invite some additional input, we're happy to respond, or talk about any of these cases. I think they're pretty realistic. We also have some resources for you here as well. Most of you probably have department level peer observation or requirements, but if you value an outsider's perspective, certainly that's something we're able to do.
If you want one of us to come in and disrupt your class, we'll be happy to do that for you.
Or bring technology. And
Sit on the front row and text. We can do that.
Absolutely.
Chocolate milk.
Chocolate milk. Yes, always think about that chocolate milk.
Fried things.
So a few resources here, and we'll send the slides out, and hopefully summer, thinking about next year, we'd like to develop a deep course based on this topic, and if you have any suggestions for maybe areas that we didn't cover, certainly send those.
Ideas for skits
along
of
as well.
classroom disruption.
Yes. So, thank you very much for
Thank you.
being here. Yeah.